Rebecca from ChemKnits, and right here I have a really long skein. This skein has a 5-meter circumference, and it is a great yarn to use for dyeing something self-striping because you can dye a long enough repeat to give you a stripe on socks. Now this particular yarn I bought in the long hank. This is Wool to Die For's long hank platinum sock. It is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And for most 3-color stripe colorways and things, you'll probably want something bigger than this. I do have other videos where I make my own long skeins, either using my PVC pipe nitty notty or a warping board, but this is a nice easy way that starts out with half of the big reskeining job done, and so I like to use these. My plan today is to create a 2-color stripe. Now I say stripe with air quotes because half of this will dye a solid color, and then the other half we're going to dye random variegated. So we'll have alternating stripes of color, of solid color, and then variegated. Just to show that your self-striping yarn doesn't have to be tonal and tonal and tonal. You can have some fun with it. But now I'm gonna go pre-soak this yarn in some plain tap water with no acid for 15-30 minutes. It doesn't really matter. I just want it to be well saturated, and platinum soaks up liquid really easily. I removed most of the liquid from the dye bath of our self-striping yarn because I do need to add acid, and I figured may as well just pour a little bit of some white vinegar on. And since we have not as much volume of water in here, I don't need to add as much acid. But the amount I added was probably around a couple tablespoons worth. But we need the acid because we're gonna hand paint about half of the yarn to get a fun variegated color. I'm gonna squeeze out a lot of the liquid to leave space to add liquid dyes back into the yarn. And I have protected my countertop with some plastic wrap. So that way, whatever I dye, I can wrap it up and keep the colors a little bit more protected. But the first thing I need to do is sort of measure the skein out. And by measuring the skein, I'm gonna want to divide it in half, approximately, but I also don't want to tangle it. So what I'm doing is looking for one of the ties that was on the yarn, and you want to be careful. Aha, but there we go. And now I'm going to put 2 of these ends together and sort of fold it over, and then over here in approximately the middle. It doesn't have to be exact. It could be exact if you really wanted, but I'm going to take a zip tie and add it so tight that I break it. I had a feeling that would happen. Some of these old zip ties get very brittle. There we go. And so it's not very tight. It could maybe move a little bit, but this is going to help me mark that center point approximately. Yeah, approximately. Now the other thing I want to do, and this is just to help me later on, I'm going to add a zip tie, just as a tie onto here, just so that way I can know where in the circle we are, just in case things get tangled. That might help me in the future. And then all this yarn that we're not dyeing right now, I'm just popping into a little container that we're going to keep off to the side. And then as for everything else, we can now spread this out onto our counter. And see, the zip tie that I have over there is coming in a little bit handy because I know where it is. And with all this yarn that we have here, we can dye this in whatever random, modeled, colorful way we want, and I'm excited about that. I have a number of dye stocks here, and the way I plan to dye this today is to take a little bit of these colors add it on. We'll work it through at some point. This, I think, is Chartreuse. Don't know if it's from Dharma or Jacquard. Now, we've got Radioactive from Dharma. My hypothesis is that this Chartreuse is from Jacquard. I've got Spearmint Breeze, which is a more aqua mint color. I have some Brilliant Yellow, and I have some Caribbean Blue, which is a nice bright blue. Now, I'm not planning on doing this specifically in a repeating way, but we're going to have some small sections of color that aren't even going to necessarily be repeating. It'll be layered, and I'm really just going to take drops of these dye stalks. We may, help work things through with fingers. Things may stay put a little bit where they are, but I'm going to try to have some fun with this. And, well, let's just go and apply color. And all of these dye stalks were mixed at a 1% concentration, which means there was 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of liquid. I let the dyes speak to me, and dripping the color onto the yarn really was fun and freeing, and I really just watched what the colors were doing and leaned into it. It's so fun doing something that is so random when you're doing a colorway that otherwise needs more planning, like self-striping. And I decided that it's okay if I leave some whites behind, because we could get some back staining. Some of these colors are known bleeders, and I like the way it's coming together. I went the heaviest with the Spearmint Breeze, what I believe is Jacquard Chartreuse, and then Radioactive from Dharma, and use a little bit less of the Brilliant Yellow and Caribbean Blue, because I want them to be pops of color. I don't want to end up with like vertical stripes that pool. I want it to be specklier and still a stripe, because it's going to contrast with the other color that we use, but to have it be more random and free-flowing. Now, as random as this ended up being, I didn't need to protect my work surface additionally with some plastic wrap that I added. The plastic wrap is really handy if you want to keep, when you're steam setting, colors from bleeding into one another. And I suppose there is still a little bit of purpose for me there, but I could have been fine without using that plastic wrap. But sometimes it's better to be safe when you think you may do a different type of hand-painted colorway than not have it. And so I'm glad I had it just in case. Because if I had hand painted this in a more variegated segment with, say, like yellow and then blue, and didn't want them to bleed together, then having the plastic wrap would be really important with something this long. But it's going to be okay if things touch a little bit, because we were really random with our placement. Now, what this is going to let me do is keep things separate, and maybe this will just make my life easier when we go to dye our tonal section here that I have sort of in this cup. But I think before dyeing that, I am going to go ahead and steam set things for 30 minutes in my steamer basket. So I'll see you in 30 minutes. I forgot to show things as they were nice and steamy, but here's how things were in the steamer basket. And okay, we got one tiny spot of transfer onto the yarn we reserved, but otherwise everything is pretty good. So what we're gonna do now is get set up so we can dye our other color. And this is gonna involve dyeing this white portion, but not dyeing the green. So I'm just stuffing that in there. Now, as for our zip tie placement, it wasn't that tight, but I'm moving it down a little bit to give us some buffer. And so that way we don't have like a big white patch at our transition point. And we can use the same dye bath that we used for steaming. I just want to add a little bit more water to it. I don't know quite how much water was in there before. Less than 8 cups. But I just added 8 cups of water. And we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. start heating this again. And now I'm coming in with about 75 milliliters of our 1% dye stock of dark navy. Okay. And since we have about half of the yarn we're gonna dye, this will give us around a 1.5% depth of shade, because if we are dyeing 50 grams of yarn with 0.75 grams of dye, it's 1.5. And I know we're not super hot yet, and I'm gonna have to figure out how to best deal with this. Let's add our yarn. Dip it all the way in, but I'm gonna need to do something. I'm like pulling the yarn out of the dye bath a little bit. Okay, because you can see I have the yarn sitting out of here, and it's sitting in in a container next door that's protected from the heat. But I think we should have all of the yarn we want to get color in the dye. You can see it doesn't look that dark yet, but because most of the dye is in the water. So I'm gonna keep an eye on this. Let's heat it for 10 minutes and then see where we are. And I'm gonna try to avoid touching it in that time. But I am gonna zoom in on this point, which is a little bit blocked because of the zip tie. So I'm curious if the color will travel up that section or not. I'm actually gonna lower it a little bit more. But I will see you all in about 10 minutes. Okay, I don't know if the camera moved at all, but you can see that we don't have a lot of change in where the color has moved up in this time. Now, I don't know if liquid is gonna be coming up because of the capillary effect. I don't know. What I do know is that more color is starting to go into our yarn, and so I can stir that, which could cause more color to wick up onto our other yarn. But you can see our dye bath is slowly starting to cool. I had someone ask me recently in a live stream if I ever dye things above a 1% depth of shade, and that's what we're doing right here. But you can look at dye manufacturers' websites to get a sense of how much more you can go, like how high you can go, and they have recommendations for what you should do for various colors. I will say that for most colors, 1% or 1 gram of 1% depth of shade or 1 gram of dye with 100 grams of yarn is a reasonable starting place. But there are some colors where that would be too much. So it's just always worth keeping that in mind. But anyway, I mean, we're getting hot, so I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes and then we'll be back. Okay, it's been 30 minutes and I'm not feeling a lot of liquid that's been wicked or anything like that, which is only something I'm even mentioning because I was curious, but I'm seeing no color come up above where I had placed this. So I'm carefully removing the yarn. It's hard to drain the liquid. Probably could have gone a little darker with the navy, but I'm gonna let things cool so that way we can wash it. I think we're gonna have some nice contrast in here, and I'm really excited to see what this looks like, and I'm especially excited to swatch it. But anyway, I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, we're gonna wash our yarn. I have here a tub of cool water. I'm adding some soap to it in advance, mainly in case there's some back staining with the navy, which I don't know if there would be, but I'm gonna have to get this out of the plastic wrap we're in. Okay. And ooh, this green section is looking so pretty. Okay, what I'm gonna wanna do, just to keep things from getting super tangled, is loop the yarn around. Sort of what I was doing. Put the zip tie through that there. And then I kind of want to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm just keeping the two stripes separate for now, just in case. I don't know. I'm not that worried about transfer, but this way I can keep them separated. I know it feels very light right now. Now, the good news is I'm not seeing any color come out. So that's awesome. But there's no harm in keeping things a little bit separated as we dry it. Oh, this green is so fun. I know from far away it looks just like very, very green, but it is variegated. And you can go more variegated with it. You can do something as wild as we do in like any colorway that's multicolored. And then you could still do a tonal section over there. Of course, you could also do two different wild variegated sections and have those alternate. There's no reason why you have to go for plain stripes when you're dyeing a long skein. Oh, but we're looking good. That makes me so happy. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and finish rinsing out the soap. Then I'm gonna put my yarn through the spin dryer and hang it up to dry. So we can look at our finished skein and then we can make some swatches. Time to go make this mess pretty again. There's two big points I want to make right now. One, these sections are pretty evenly spaced. We'll see in the eventual swatch if the stripes are about the same space, but I'm very impressed that I divided it in half and that worked well, because sometimes things shift or I don't measure carefully and one ends up being a little longer than the other, which is fine. They don't have to be even. But I think if they're going to be uneven, you want it to be a little more obvious and dramatic versus, you know, I don't think you really want like a 60-40 situation. You want more of a 75-25. But I digress. The other thing that isn't really about self-striping yarn, but this blue, green, yellow colorway on the bottom and then the navy tonal, these are two of my favorite types of yarn to mix for color work. I love having a bright variegated yarn with a dark solid. It ends up creating sort of like a stained glass effect. And so I think that this would be stunning on a pair of socks or something with these colors alternating. Zooming in on our colorful section, I'm really glad that I ended up going so random. I think I thought I was going to do something a little more regular variegated, but I love that we have something that is very likely non-pooling for one of the stripes, because pooling is exactly what the stripes are going to do, because you have enough length that you're going to get a couple of rounds of the yarn on the same layer. And so that's just exciting. Our navy almost has a little bit of glaze to it also. Now the next thing that I need to do is go wind this into a more manageable sized skein. So for reference, most skeins that you buy from Knit Picks would be like 4 feet around. Maybe from Wool to Dye For, they're 5 or 6 feet around. And the circumference of this skein is 5 meters. And so it's too big to fit on a Swift. I'm gonna have to do something like set it up in between 2 chairs and walk back and forth. And maybe if I figured out a way to film the process, I'm entering some B-roll that maybe I use as a short in here. But otherwise, just picture me standing in the middle of a circle, slowly winding this onto a knitting body. The skein is now a much more reasonable size. So stay tuned for me to knit a swatch out of this self-striping colorway, so then you can get a feel of how big the color sections are. Here is our swatch that is 30 stitches stockinette knit on 2.75 millimeter knitting needles, or size 2. And each of the stripes is about 7 rows. Now, I think if you were going to make socks, each stripe would be probably about half that, so maybe around 3.5 rounds before shifting. Now, the platinum long hanks I used to create this yarn are 5 meters in circumference, which are slightly bigger than the skeins I make myself when I use my Nitty Naughty PVC pipe Nitty Naughty with 4 feet in the middle. So if you want thicker stripes, you're gonna need to use a longer skein. Or I guess you could consider switching between 2 colors, but the perk of having self-striping yarn is that the stripes will happen automatically and you don't have to do anything to do it. And I have to say, I adore these variegated sections and how they turned out. Now the last thing I need to do is unravel the swatch to put it back into the skein and list this in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to support the channel, go and check out my Etsy shop. And so I hope that this just shows that you don't have to play around with self-striping yarns in a semi-solid repeating stripe way. You can do something really random and irregular with these long hanks, as I've shown in a few different ways. I have a whole playlist of self-striping type patterns, but you can play around with it to create your own custom yarn. Thank you so much for watching.